Hey, everybody. Welcome home. Get comfortable. It's time. How's everybody doing? Are you ready? Are you ready for some blankie time? You ready for some clean socks time? Starting off on page 123 of the notes 1. All right, let's get the fire going. There we go. How's that? Let's get rid of that nonsense. Mm, mm, There we go. All right. There we go. I still can't believe this is a thing. I never in a million years would have thought. I don't even know how to read. I'm just guessing. All right, get comfortable. Here we go. Hobie, 20 May, year 22. I left the police station with Tay. Thank you. I bowed and shouted all the more energetically, but I really wasn't in the mood. It wasn't far from the police station to Tay's house. If he lived farther from the police station, would he still be there this much? Why had his parents settled down so close to the police station? The world was so unjust and unfair to this foolishly good-hearted and sensitive kid. I placed my arm around Tay's shoulders and casually asked if he was hungry. Tay shook his head. Did the police officers welcome you back and buy you a meal? I asked again, but he didn't answer. The two of us walked in the sunlight, but an icy wind seemed to nip at my heart. I couldn't imagine how he must be feeling when I felt this chilly inside. His heart must have felt ripped and torn. Or does he have a heart left at all? How much anguish has he endured? I couldn't look him in his eyes, so I turned my glance upwards. An airplane was flying against the somewhat murky sky. I first saw the scar on Tay's back in Junie's container. I couldn't bring myself to ask about it when he was smiling so broadly with his new t-shirt present. I had no parents. I had no memory of Dad, and my memory of Mom stopped at the age of 7. I probably had more open wounds and scars regarding family and childhood than anyone. People always said so easily that we need to overcome our wounds, embrace them, and accept them as part of our lives, that we need to reconcile with and forgive others to go on living. It wasn't that I wasn't aware of it. It wasn't that I didn't want to give it a try. But giving it a try didn't guarantee success. No one had taught me how. The world gave us new wounds even before the old ones could heal. Surely, no one in the world can avoid getting hurt. I was aware of that. But do we really need to get hurt this deeply? For what? Why did these things happen to us? I'm okay. I can go alone, Tay said at the intersection. I know. I led the way. I'm really okay. See, I'm fine. Tay smiled. I didn't respond. He couldn't be okay. But once he admitted that he wasn't okay, I wouldn't be able to bear it. So, he was just ignoring the truth. That became his habit. Tay followed me, putting up his hood. You're really not hungry? I asked him when he had walked up to the outdoor hallway that led to his house. He smiled that foolish smile and nodded. I stayed for a little and watched him walk towards his door, and I finally turned around. The path he was walking down and the path I walked through were both narrow and bleak. He and I were both alone. Jin, 20 May, year 22. Tae's house was in one of the oldest buildings in the neighborhood. Paint was peeling off here and there, and weeds were growing out of cracks in the cement walls. It looked run down. I was waiting for Tae and Hobie in the small park on the hill behind the building. As it was on the slope, it overlooked the outdoor hallway on Tae's floor of the building. Hobie appeared from around a corner leading into an alley in the distance. Tae was following him. His face wasn't quite visible because he had his hood pulled down tight. Tae and Hobie exchanged a few words at the mouth of the alley. Tae seemed to be trying to send Hobie home, and Hobie was saying he was fine. Hobie started to walk again first. The two came up to the front of the building without a word. Hobie climbed the stairs and stopped in front of Tae's door. He tapped on Tae's shoulder and made a gesture at him to go into the house, and then he turned around and started walking towards the exit. Tae stared at him from behind for a moment and reached out for the doorknob. I called Hobie at the moment when Tae began to open the door. After the dial tone rang 3 times, Hobie took out his phone in the middle of the hallway. Tae was stepping into his house. "Hobie, can you call Tae?" Hobie stopped walking. "I just saw him." I said I was planning a trip to the sea for all of us, and he should ask Tae to come along. Hobie laughed, saying of course Tae would come along. "But just to make sure, could you ask him and let me know?" I hung up hastily. This was the time. Hobie must go into Tae's house now. Hobie tilted his head sideways, looking at his phone screen, and turned around. And then he went into Tae's house through the still open door. Tae, 20 May, year 22. I looked down at my palm. Blood was oozing out. Just when my legs started to give out and I was about to collapse, someone grabbed me from behind. Sunlight came in through the murky window. My sister was crying, and Hobie was standing there in silence. As usual, the floor was cluttered with dirty dishes, odds and ends, and blankets. Dad had already escaped the room before I realized it. The uncontrollable rage and sorrow that welled up when I flung myself at Dad were still fresh in my mind. I didn't know what held me back when I was about to stab him. I didn't know how to douse these raging flames inside of me. I wanted to kill myself instead of Dad. If I could, I wanted to drop dead right then and right there. I couldn't even shed tears. I wanted to cry out loud, kick and destroy everything, and break down. But it all seemed beyond my control. "Sorry, Hobie, I'm fine. You go ahead." My voice sounded dry and calm, contrary to my frantic mind. I sent Hobie home against his will and looked down at my palm. Blood was still coming out in drops. Instead of stabbing Dad, I'd smashed a bottle on the floor. The bottle had broken into pieces and cut my palm. The world spun and twirled when I closed my eyes. My brain froze. What should I do now? How should I live? After I regained consciousness, I found myself looking at Junie's number. Even in this situation, or because of this situation, I was longing for Junie, and the more desperately. I wanted to confess to him. I almost killed Dad, who brought me into this world and who beat me every day. I almost killed him. No, I actually killed him. Countless times. I killed him countless times in my head. I want to kill him. I want to die. I don't know what to do. I'm lost, and I just want to see you now. The most beautiful day of our lives. Jungkook, 22 May, year 22. Someone shook my shoulder to wake me up. When I opened my eyes, the car window was filled entirely with the seascape. The sea breeze felt chilly, probably because I was only half awake. I wrapped myself with both arms and got out of the car. The others, already far out on the beach where the waves broke against the shore, waved at me. Beyond them was the sea, and above the sea was the sun. The entire scene looked like a still frame. The wind picked up and filled the still frame with raging sand just as I raised my hand to wave back. The gritty dust rose from the ground and swirled about. The others turned around all at once, covering their faces to ward off grainy wind. I did the same, shutting my eyes tightly, bending my head and covering my face with my arm. We stood in this position amidst the sounds of lapping waves and whistling wind for a long time. I tried to open my eyes, but they stung from the sand. "Don't rub them, it'll just make it worse." Upon hearing Hobie, I slowly blinked. The sea, the sky, and the others kept appearing and disappearing through the tears welling up in my eyes. After I blinked several times, tears streamed down and the stinging subsided. The tears must have flushed the grains of sand out. I heard the others laughing. They were laughing at me, standing in the middle of the empty beach, shedding tears. It was unclear who began to run first. It started out as a silly game. I pretended to chase the others, who kept making fun of me. Hobie darted off as if he was fleeing from me, and then the rest joined in, running towards and away from one another and laughing joyfully. At some point, we were all running along the coastal road. I ran behind the others. I was out of breath, sweaty, and I had a splitting headache. But I didn't stop because they continued on. We'd all met again, sprung Jimin from the hospital, and returned to this same beach. It was all unplanned. All I'd done was tag along, but it felt exhilarating. Maybe running around blankly was the only way for me to deal with that fearfully thrilling sensation. I'd done the same when we all ditched school and came to this beach the first time. "That's right. We were like this back then, too," Junie said when we dropped back down to the beach to catch our breath. "I think it was just as hot then. When was it?" It was Jimin. "It was June 12th. My good memory took everyone by surprise. I remembered it exactly because the photo we had taken on this beach was marked with the date. I sometimes took it out and stared at it. I didn't tell anyone, but I felt on that long ago day that I had finally found a real family. Real brothers. "Guys!" I began to express my gratitude, but found myself at a loss for words. "What?" The others rushed me one by one and then flung themselves at me. We rolled around on the beach, tangled up together, playing like children. "Why are you here alone?" I sank down next to Tay, who was sitting in one corner of the sandy beach away from the others. He looked at me briefly and asked a question instead. "Was that there the last time we came here?" He was talking about the observatory. "If it was, we would have climbed it, but I don't remember it." He nodded in agreement. He kept staring at the observatory. "Let's go." Someone tapped my shoulder. It was Jin, his face unrecognizable as he was standing against the light. It might have been because I was looking up at him from a sitting position, but he looked so tall. I stood up, dusting off the sand. My feet sank deep into the burning sand. I snuck into Jin's shadow and walked on, kicking sand with the tips of my sneakers. The sand I kicked up splattered onto Jin's pants, but he never looked back. Tay, 22 May, year 22. I had seen this all before. In a dream that felt too vivid and real, I saw this sea, the seven of us, and the towering observatory. I stood on the observatory at the end of the dream, and everyone looked up at me. They were far away, so their faces were really hard to see, but still, I smiled at them, as if I was bidding them farewell. and then I jumped. Jin? Hearing Jungkook, I turned my head to see Jin climbing the observatory. At the very top, he turned his body towards us. He seemed to be trying to photograph us. The others waved at him, but I couldn't. It was like the last scene in my dream. The only difference was that Jin was up there instead of me. At that moment, it felt as if the ground sank under my feet and my body floated in the air. I shut my eyes tightly, fearing my body might plummet to the ground. I didn't clench my fist, but the wound on my palm began to hurt. The wound seemed deep, but healed more quickly than I expected. It left a red scar, and sometimes it hurt intensely, like I was being punished. Punished for all my wrongdoings. And it hurt right now. Junie, 22 May, year 22. He's only a year younger than I am. No, I didn't say so. I'm older, I know. But he's not a kid anymore. It's time he started taking care of himself. I got it. No, I'm not mad. Sorry. I looked down at the ground after I hung up the phone. We were on our way to our lodging after spending the day at the beach. A lukewarm breeze was blowing our way. It felt like my heart was clogged and would burst at any minute. Ants were marching in file on the ground covered with sand and dirt. It wasn't that I didn't love my parents. It wasn't that I didn't worry about my brother. I'd turn a deaf ear to them if I could, but I knew I'd never be able to. I knew that all too well. Then, what was the use of struggling, losing my temper, feeling distressed, and trying to break free? Far off, someone was standing still like me with his back turned. It was Jungkook. Jungkook once told me, "I want to be just like you when I grow up." I couldn't bring myself to confess that I was far from an adult, let alone an exemplary one. It seemed too brutal to crush his hope right then. I couldn't tell someone so young, someone who hadn't been given the trust, support, and affection he deserved, that you don't just become an adult by getting older and taller. I wish Jungkook's future would be kinder to him than mine was to me, but I couldn't promise that I'd be of any help to him along the way. Jin, 22 May, year 22. I looked at the others again. They were making silly jokes, laughing, chatting, and roaring with laughter again when someone sprang up and started dancing. I couldn't believe what was unfolding before my eyes. We got here together after so many trials and errors. I dreamt of this for so long and so desperately that it seemed impossible it was actually happening. But I felt uneasy because I still had something to confess. I kept hesitating and couldn't muster up the courage. But I couldn't run away from it all anymore. Unless I told them, I wouldn't be able to look my friends in the face. When dinner was almost over, I told them I had something to say, but they didn't pay much attention. Only Tae was staring at me. Several days ago, he came to me and asked about the dream he'd been having. "You know what it means, right?" He pressed me for an answer, but I acted like I didn't know. I said, "How could I know? It was just a dream." Tae got upset and turned away. It wasn't completely a lie. I didn't know why Tae had been having such a dream, but I did know how brutal it was, and that's why I couldn't tell him the truth. All the more so because I knew what he was wondering about. He didn't need to know that it wasn't a dream, him killing his father, but that it happened in real life, repetitively. No one should go through life with such agony. I wouldn't take my decision back even if it hurt our friendship. I turned my head away to avoid Tae's eyes. I closed my mouth, caught my breath, and spoke more clearly this time. "I have something to tell you." Junie and Hobie stared at me, and the others also quieted down. "I should have told you this a long time ago, when we were in high school, and Tay interrupted. When we were in high school? When you ratted on us to the principal? Or when Yoongi got kicked out of school because of that? Which one are you talking about? Criticism was plainly written on Tay's face. Tay! Junie called him in an obvious attempt to hold him back. Tay shook Junie's hand off with his eyes solidly fixed on me. That was all you're doing. And no one said anything. Everyone was caught off guard and couldn't think of anything to say. I looked at Yoongi. Tay was right. Yoongi was expelled from school because of me. I mumbled with my head bent low. I'm sorry. Tay began to speak again. Tay, 22 May, year 22. Jin, is that all? Aren't you hiding something from us? I glared at Jin. He stared back at me. I was about to press him harder when someone grabbed my shoulder to stop me. I knew who it was without looking back. It was Junie. Don't cut in. Why do you care? You're not even my real brother. I could feel Junie's eyes on the back of my head. I shook his hands off without even looking at him. I knew it, too. I was taking out my anger on Junie. When I was heading for our lodging from the beach, passing through the pine forest, I heard Junie talking on the phone. Every word he said was right. I was only a year younger, and I wasn't his real brother. I had to take care of myself, but it still hurt. Tay, I'm sorry. So let's just stop here. Jin first opened his mouth. Jin was the one who told me he was sorry. Junie didn't say anything. He just kept staring at me with angry eyes. Stop what? Just lay it all out. You're hiding something from us. Everyone's gaze was now fixed on Jin. Jin gave a look that seemed to tell us to stop. Let's go outside and talk. Junie grabbed my arm again. I tried to shake his hand off, but he tightened his grip to take me outside. I braced myself against him. Let me go. What right do you think you have? What do you know? You didn't know anything. You think you're something special, huh? And it was then. Junie abruptly let go of my arm, and I stumbled in reaction. Or it wasn't a reaction that made me stumble. The moment he let go of my arm, it felt as if the chain that linked us snapped in the middle. Everything that propped me up and served as my footing seemed to crack and split. Maybe I was hoping he wouldn't let go of my arm until the end. Maybe I was hoping he'd yell at me to shut up and drag me outside fuming. Maybe I was hoping he'd give me a good scolding like he would do to his real brother or someone too precious to give up. But he released my arm. I couldn't help but smirk. I was smirking before I knew it. I spit it out. What is all the fuss about being together? What are we to each other? We are all alone in the end. And at that moment, Jin hit me. Jimin, 22 May, year 22. We should go too. That's what Hobie said. I turned my head, looking past the door of our lodging. The table, chairs, pots, and dishes were scattered all over the place. Jimin, come on! I closed the door hurriedly. They were way ahead of me. Yoongi and Hobie took the lead, with Jungkook following closely behind them. There were 7 of us when we first came, and now only 4 were left. I looked up as we passed the observatory. There was no light on the beach after the sunset. The observatory and sea withdrew into the darkness, and nothing was visible. There was only the roar of lapping waves. I realized that this was the place we visited when we first came to the sea together. The rock, which was said to make dreams come true. We cried out at the top of our lungs on this same spot where the rock had been blown to bits to make way for a new resort. Jungkook, wasn't it somewhere over here? I looked back, but Jungkook was already bolting way ahead of the others. Hobie called after him, but he didn't seem to hear. It occurred to me then. Jungkook is always moving forward along his own path. Jungkook had always been behind the others. He had tagged along and stopped when the others stopped. And I was the same. I looked in every direction at an intersection. I had to turn left to get to the train station or right to take the bus home. I had to go back home someday. I couldn't avoid it any further. I had to confess my lies and tell the truth to my parents, even if they weren't willing to hear them. I had to start fastening the first button at some point. I saw Yoongi step into the road on the left. "Jimin, hurry up!" Hobie turned his head towards me. "Hobie, I'm going home now." And with a puzzled look, he asked, "Home?" I nodded, and then I turned right. Jungkook, 22 May, year 22. I felt like my body was floating in the air, but the next minute I was lying on the hard ground. I couldn't feel anything for some time. My entire body felt so heavy that I couldn't even lift my eyelids. I couldn't swallow or breathe. As I fell into a semi-conscious state, I grew warmer, and my body suddenly shook all over. An undefinable pain and thirst instinctively forced my eyes open. Something shimmery caught my eye, which felt dried out as if filled with sand. And at first, I thought it was a light, but it wasn't. It was bright, big, and blurry. It hung in the air motionless. I kept staring at it for a while, and it began to take shape. It was the moon. The world appeared upside down. My head must have been tilted back. In that world, the moon was also upside down. I tried to breathe by coughing, but I couldn't move. A cold fit swept over my body, and it was frightening. I tried to open my lips, but I couldn't utter a word. My vision kept fading even though my eyes were open, and someone asked me a question as my consciousness grew dimmer and dimmer. "It'll be more painful to live than to die. Do you still want to live?" After returning from the sea. Jin, 13 June, year 22. After returning from the sea, we went back to our solitary lives. As if we'd made a rule, no one called each other. We just vaguely assumed how the others were doing based on the graffiti we saw on the streets, the bright light of the gas station, and the piano sounds coming from the dilapidated building. The lodging on the beach was empty when I came back after failing to find Tae when he ran out that night. There was nothing except for a photo on the floor. And in that photo, we were smiling together with the sea in the background. It had only been a few hours earlier, but it seemed like such a long time ago. Had we worked so hard and for so long for no reason? Were we destined to fall apart like this? I passed the gas station without stopping. We'd meet again someday. We'd laugh together someday as we did in the photo. I'd gather enough courage to face myself someday. But today was not that time. Damp wind blew just like that day. At that moment, my phone rang as if sending me a warning. The phone sent reverberations to the photo hung on the rearview mirror. Hobie's name appeared on the screen. Jin, Jungkook got into an accident that night. Jungkook, 13 June, year 22. I heard faint voices and opened my eyes to find Hobie and Jimin gazing at me. Every time I blinked, their faces kept disappearing and appearing again. "Are you hurt? Are you in pain?" Jimin asked. "I'm fine, I'm not hurt." But it was a lie. It was a serious accident, and I had almost died. The doctors kept warning the others for days that they should be prepared for the worst-case scenario. I regained consciousness after 10 days, and began to recuperate at an astonishing rate. "You should have called us. What are we to you?" Hobie sounded mad. "Hobie, it's not that I began to talk, but I couldn't finish the sentence. As soon as I came to myself at the hospital, I thought of them. If I would have been able to think straight, I would have called them first, but my mind was blank and I was in pain. The sedative they gave me was so strong that reality, dreams, memories, and illusions all seemed to be knotted up in my head and were impossible to disentangle. The unbearable pain finally subsided, but the strange images that flashed before my eyes while suffering from fever and insomnia kept coming back. I wasn't sure whether those scenes had actually happened, or they were just twisted nightmares triggered by severe pain. I couldn't trust my memory, but I still couldn't contact them. I didn't know what to say or even how to start talking. I just smiled at them. Or I tried to smile at them. My face must have looked like it was all twisted up, and I was about to cry. Hobie, 13 June, year 22. I walked out of the room because I felt tears welling up. Jungkook saying he was fine was heart-wrenching. I had just heard of Jungkook's accident that afternoon. The burger joint was packed with pedestrians taking shelter from the rain. Some of them were Jungkook's classmates. How come Jungkook doesn't show up anymore? I didn't ask this question for any particular reason. I'd lost contact with all the others after returning from the sea, including Jungkook. And then an unexpected answer came my way. "Oh, he was in an accident, so he's been absent." "An accident? Is he hurt badly?" "Well, we don't know. He hasn't been to school for, 20 days? I called him immediately, but Jungkook didn't answer. I was about to call again, but decided to open our group chat instead. No new messages over the past 20 days. The last message was from when we were at the sea. Was it then? That night when we all parted and went back home. Was it that night? I left a message that Jungkook was badly hurt, and that whatever everyone was up to, it was ridiculous not to know what had happened to him for over 20 days. The number next to my message didn't budge, meaning none of the others opened the chat to read my message. Did our days together mean nothing? Were we fair weather friends? I got mad at myself. Mad for not contacting him earlier. Mad for letting him return home alone. Jungkook was not a child, but he was the youngest. And he was still just a student. I strolled up and down the hallway a few times and stopped in front of his room. Through the cracked door, I recognized Jungkook's face. He clearly was not fine. He looked as pale as a sheet. Suddenly, the image of Jungkook coming through the door of our empty hideout came into my mind. He was just in his 3rd year of middle school. His naive face showed a sense of loss, as if he'd realized something had come to an end. Did our existence remind him of that sense of loss? 4 of the others hadn't checked my message in the group chat yet. I posted another message. This is disappointing. You? Dancing? When I stepped into the room, Jimin and Jungkook were talking about a dance crew. Jimin said it had only been about 2 weeks since he joined the crew and turned his head bashfully. That's right. You were a good dancer. We should all go and see you dance. Tae's call came through at that moment. What have you been doing? Why didn't you check my message earlier? I tried to sound angrier than I actually was. Tae stuttered in a croaky voice as if he'd been crying. Tae, 13 June, year 22. How's Jungkook? That's all I could say. I wrapped up my shift at the convenience store and stepped onto the street to find puddles here and there. It had rained a few hours ago, I'd noticed the rain when I turned my head to look out the glass door when one of the customers brought an umbrella. My face was reflected back at me in the puddle. My eyes filled with tears and my throat was choked. Hobie said he was with Jungkook, and Jungkook looked better than he thought, and I dropped down. I'm okay. Hobie must have handed his phone over to Jungkook. He seemed to be pretending that he was okay. How about you? Worry about yourself. My reply was curt, without meaning to be. Jungkook laughed bashfully. I'm going over there right now. I couldn't keep my word. I got to the hospital in no time, ran up the stairs because I couldn't wait for the elevator, and darted down the hallway. I was just about to jump into Jungkook's room, but I froze there. I could hear voices through the cracked door. It was Junie. Jin. I stepped back without realizing it. I'm always the same, Junie said, and indeed he was. He was just going on with his life. I dropped down on a bench in the hallway. People in patient uniforms walked by, and some were in tears. If someone asked, I must have answered the same. That I was always the same. That was the truth. I just went back and forth between my house and the convenience store. Dad was still drinking and making trouble from time to time. The indoor light was still dim, and the drain got clogged frequently. Well, there was one change. The nightmare had stopped. The nightmare of Yoongi dying, Jungkook falling, and Hobie in a frenzy of despair. Come to think of it, the nightmare must have stopped after the night we fought at the beach. It was replaced by another dream. Tears ran down Jin's face. Blue flower petals rolled on the asphalt street at night, were trampled down, and were tinted with someone's blood. I bent my steps. The elevator was coming up from the second basement floor. I looked back at the patient room. I was not ready to meet Jin and Junie yet. Junie, 13 June, year 22. I arrived at Jungkook's hospital room in the middle of the night, and Jungkook seemed okay. He laughed a lot and talked a lot, and I did too. We talked about the gas station, the weather, and really whatever else, so we didn't have to talk about what was really important. Jungkook should have asked, but he didn't. He didn't ask why the others fought that night, why we left, and why we didn't come back. And I was no different. I didn't tell him why I left our lodging without saying anything, and didn't ask Jin what problems he had with Tae. We just swallowed the questions that we should have blurted out. On our way back, Jin asked me if I was okay. Do you know you haven't said a word yet? I told him I didn't know, and I was sorry. I told him I was fine. We parted near the gas station. I looked around the night street just before I went into the gas station. It was desolate. The red "Do Not Walk" signal turned to the green "Walk" signal at the crosswalk. I crossed the street and walked along the railroad, the fourth container from the end. I had had a campfire here before we left for the sea, and this was the first time I came here since that day. Dust rose when I opened the container door. I stood there for a while until my eyes got used to the darkness. From what I'd heard from Jungkook, the others didn't keep in touch with each other, and no one updated me about Tae. But nothing much would have changed. This container was the only place where Tae could have taken shelter from his dad. I knew it, but I didn't drop by. It was exhausting enough to go back and forth between the library and the gas station. It was the truth and an excuse at the same time. Deep down inside, I might have been avoiding Tae. I couldn't afford to confront him. It was too emotionally exhausting. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see different corners of the container. They were filled with memories of us sharing our lives together. I told Jin that I was okay, but really I wasn't. Jungkook, who got into an accident, couldn't be okay. It couldn't be okay to just drown what happened that night all at once. If Tae and Jin hadn't gotten into a fight that night, if I'd stayed with the others, if anyone had been with Jungkook, then there wouldn't have been an accident. But I said I was okay. I casually chatted with him as if none of it was my fault and tapped him on the shoulder, telling him to recover quickly. I said it like it was a word of blessing or advice or consolation. I hadn't changed a bit. I was always hesitant before asking questions and making choices at a fork in the road. Yoongi, 15 June, year 22. I woke up from a weird dream. I thought I heard someone knock on the door, but I couldn't hear anything after getting up. I must have heard it in my dream. What time is it? I picked up my phone, but the battery was dead. I connected my phone to the charger and got out of bed. My head ached and my shoulders felt stiff. The piece I'd worked on until dawn was replaying again and again. I'd been staying up all night for several days, but I still couldn't find the key to unravel the tangled notes. Maybe it was because of that piece replaying over and over again, but in my dream, I was roaming around in the fog following a faint whistling sound. After a long time, I arrived at a garden of an apartment complex. There, I found a piano key lying amongst thick bushes. The half-burned piano key was covered with soil and rotten leaves. I walked into the garden and reached out for the key. Just as I'd almost grasped at the apartment complex, the fog and the whistling sound all disappeared at once. The next minute, I was standing in the middle of this workroom. In the distance, I was sitting in front of the piano with Jungkook. Jungkook said something and I laughed. When was this? I couldn't recall the exact date, but this scene was imprinted on my memory as clear as day. There were many days I could clearly see the scene. And all of a sudden, it became dark outside, and I was wandering through the night street. I was on my way back from the beach. I put my hands into my pockets as I talked about my work to Hobie, and I felt the piano key with my fingertips. The dream continued on in this disjointed manner. Moments overlapped with one another and fragments of memories piled up in a mess. I heard a banging sound at the entrance just as I turned off the music. Who could that be? I opened the door, but no one was there. I drank a cup of water and laid down on the sofa. The past few weeks had been a hectic merry-go-round. Everything just couldn't go smooth when composing music. It was hard to concentrate at first, and I was also not used to working with a partner. The woman was straightforward and outspoken. She popped in and out of my workroom whenever she felt like it. She never hesitated or beat around the bush when she evaluated my work. She took away my lighter when I tried to smoke and threw me a lollipop instead. She nagged me to sleep and eat. I couldn't argue with her because her performance and pieces were impressive, because her evaluation was accurate. And that provoked me. I began to spend more and more time at my workroom. I lost my sense of time and became addicted to my work. I would stay up all night once I got down to work. I didn't answer calls or check messages. All of my nerves were on edge, and I didn't want to talk with anyone. I switched off the alerts for every chat app. Would I have turned out as skilled and talented as the woman if I hadn't wasted my time and had continued training in music? I wondered. I didn't want to fall behind her. This is really nice. That was what that woman said after listening to the unfinished piece yesterday evening. It was an upgraded version of what I'd previously written. This is really nice. It felt as if I'd heard the exact same words before. I was trying to call up the memory when she got her guitar out. And then she began to harmonize and play variations of the melody. I sat in front of the piano and played along. Don't forget, we're meeting at the hospital tomorrow morning. The woman packed her guitar and stood about 2 hours later. I looked up at her with a blank face, and she rolled her eyes. And then I remembered. She'd been giving free solo performances at hospitals and schools. She told me last week to tag along to the next performance. I hadn't answered, but she finalized the plan on her own. She said she'd call early in the morning, and I should make sure to pick up the phone. After she left, I sat in front of the piano again. It wasn't bad, but it felt as if something substantial was missing. I distinctly remembered that I'd almost grasped what it was the last time I worked on this piece. I made changes, but nothing clicked. I stood up from the piano bench, feeling pressure on my chest. Maybe I was putting too much emphasis on that something because it didn't come to me. Maybe it'd be better to fine-tune the piece a bit more and stop waiting for that something. I looked out the window. The sun was coming up. My phone vibrated as it powered up again. She hadn't called yet. I laid down on the sofa. My phone rang after a few minutes. The name Jimin appeared on the screen. That instantly reminded me of a scene from my dream last night. A house was aflame. Someone asked me, "Is there anyone inside?" I answered, "No, there's no one inside." The scene shifted, and I was sitting in Mom's unlit room. Mom was saying, "If I hadn't had you, if you hadn't have been born..." I don't know how I got from my workroom to the hospital. I was running up the stairs like crazy when I snapped out of it. The hallway was strangely long and dark. People in patient uniforms slid by. My heart kept throbbing. Their faces were pale like sheets and expressionless. They seemed dead. I could hear my heavy breathing in my own head. I could see Jungkook in his patient uniform lying on the bed through the cracked door. He must be asleep, but he seemed as if he were dead. He almost died. The doctor said it was a miracle he was alive. It was that night we came back from the beach. Jimin's voice was still ringing in my ears. I turned my head. I couldn't look at him anymore. A multitude of images flashed before my eyes like a panorama. Panorama. Pajamas? The flame that made a crackling sound in a drum at a construction site. Mom's room that had always been unlit. The sounds of the piano that came from the fire. Jungkook's back as he clumsily played the piano at the music shop. Jungkook lying unconscious on the empty street, and the pain and fear he must have gone through as he lost consciousness. She said, "It's all because of you." She said, "If you hadn't been born..." Mom's voice. Or was it mine? Or was it someone else's? I'd been tormented my whole life because of those words. I wanted to believe that they weren't true. But Jungkook was lying there. He was lying in a hospital where patients roamed around like the living dead. If I'd just ignored him and left the music shop, if I'd just died in the flames, would none of this have happened? At that moment, the melodies of the woman's guitar penetrated my mind. The guitar sound overlapped the crackling sound of the blazing fire, the sound of the piano, and countless other sounds. I covered my head and ears with both arms, but the sound of the guitar only grew louder. I turned and began to escape down the hallway. I bumped into passers-by, but I didn't have time to turn around and apologize. They shouted curses at me. I didn't look back. I had to run away from that voice and the hallucination. My head ached. I'd lost all my confidence. I ran down the hallway, faltering and staggering, and got out of the hospital. Jungkook, 15 June, year 22. A noise from outside the room aroused me from sleep. I was having a strange dream but couldn't quite remember the details. The night of the traffic accident replayed like a blurry CCTV screen in black and white. I could feel my heartbeat slow down and then quicken explosively. All of a sudden, pain surged, and someone was whispering faintly. The next minute, I woke up writhing. My entire body was soaked with sweat. The sunlight came through the window and right onto my face. I stepped into the hallway and was met by the usual scene. It was my first time to use the crutches. I still needed to get used to them, but they were much easier than a wheelchair. I went outside through the entrance, and it was breezy. My sweat cooled quickly, and it felt chilly on the back of my neck. It wasn't as warm as I'd thought inside the patient room. As I sat down on the bench and opened my sketchbook, the doctor in charge came over to me. He said it was a miracle that I had recovered. He hadn't thought it'd be possible. He tapped me on the shoulder, saying I was the living proof of a miracle. You should be good for the rest of your life. I turned my head and saw a girl standing there who I'd met yesterday in the hallway. The girl said it was so amazing to find a miracle right next to her and asked me how I felt. I responded that I was just really healthy. I lowered my eyes again to the sketchbook. Before I knew it, I was drawing what I'd seen in my dream. My memories were blurred like the CCTV screen. It was hard to concentrate on my drawing or the memories because the girl kept asking my questions. After a while, I looked up. A familiar song was playing. Someone was giving a performance in the distance. I definitely knew this song. Yoongi sometimes played this in his workroom. I went over to the stage on my crutches. A lighter marked YK was hanging on the guitar. Jimin, 3 July, year 22. Hobie had been in a bad mood since he visited Jungkook. If anyone could truly tie the 7 of us together as we, Hobie could. He embraced and protected us like a shelter. But he wasn't always as bright and cheerful on the inside as he tried to appear in front of us. It was closer to a sense of responsibility. He instinctively sensed the wounds and pain of those around him and couldn't bear them well. This was why he pretended to be livelier than he actually was by nature. Even today, Hobie just sat in one corner of the practice room for a long time and left without saying a word. I joined Just Dance and began to learn how to dance right after I returned from the sea. Hobie gave me the opportunity. I was awkward at meeting new people as I'd spent too much time in the hospital. He brought me a new dance partner too. She was a friend he'd met at the orphanage. She was the only person who could make him laugh when he was in that mood. When she murmured something while looking at his phone together, he chuckled. You laughed, and she made fun of him. Hobie turned his head away, telling her to stop it, and he chuckled again. The practice room became silent in a flash after I turned off the music. I just lay there on the floor. I liked dancing when I was little. I danced a lot, and often I was praised for it. But the patient room wasn't a good place for dancing. When I attended school in between hospital stays, I just sank my head on my chest to avoid the eyes of my classmates. After a while, my body felt so stiff. I couldn't perform the motions that Hobie did so easily. There was nothing to do but keep practicing, even after everyone else had left. I replayed the video of the dance moves I'd learned earlier on my phone. Hobie's moves were fluid, but accurate in the video. I knew that they were a product of years of practice, and that it would take a long time for a novice like me to reach that level. It was wishful thinking. I could only keep sighing out loud. I went to my parents' house that day. As I looked up the brightly lit windows, I couldn't help but think, has this place ever been our house? I pressed the bell at the front gate. It took a while for it to open. I took the elevator and got off at the 17th floor. Although the door was open, no one came out to greet me. My parents were sitting on the sofa in the living room, watching a black and white movie on TV. I don't want to go back to the hospital, I blurted out after some hesitation. Don't worry, I won't do anything rash, but I'm not going back there. Where have you been? Mom asked. With my friends. Friends? Wash up and go to bed. We'll take some time to think about what to do with you, Dad cut in. I bowed and went to my room down the hallway. As soon as the door closed behind my back, I collapsed. We'll take some time to think about what to do with you, Dad's voice rang in my head. I tried to brace myself, but it wasn't easy. I barely slept that night. Instead, I made 2 resolutions. I'll discover what I'd like to commit myself to, and I'll prove that I'm good at it. I picked myself up and stood in front of the mirror. I could imitate the turns pretty well, but my feet kept getting twisted up. I kept making mistakes. I was supposed to do steps with my new dancing partner the next day, and I wanted to impress her. I wanted to be recognized as an equal instead of hearing, "Not bad." Jimin, 4 July, year 22. When I came back to myself, I was rubbing at my arm so hard that my skin peeled off. My hands trembled, and I could hear the sound of my heavy breathing. A thin stream of blood ran down my arm. By the reflection in the mirror, I could see that my eyes were bloodshot. Fragments of what just happened raced through my mind. I'd lost concentration while dancing with my partner. My steps got tangled. I crashed into her, fell down, and skinned my arm. The blood reminded me of the grass flower arboretum. I felt suffocated. I couldn't remember how I got up, ran out of the practice room, and made it to the restroom. I scrubbed and washed the scrape like crazy, becoming more and more frightened at seeing the blood suck down the drain. I thought I'd overcome this. I thought I was okay. But I wasn't. I had to flee. I had to wash it off. I had to look the other way. And then I suddenly realized that my partner also fell. I quickly rushed back to the practice room, but there was no one there. Her overcoat and Hobie's bag were scattered on the floor. I ran outside. It was raining hard. I could see Hobie with my dancing partner on his back, running with all his might in the far distance. She seemed to be unconscious. Her limp arms swayed in every direction. I chased after him with an umbrella in my hand, but came to a stop. I tried to recall the moment she fell, but I couldn't. When I saw the blood, everything around me vanished. I wouldn't be of any help, even if I caught up with him. I'd hurt her by pushing her to the ground, but didn't even stop to see if she was okay, because I was shaking like jelly at my own blood. I turned around. Every time I took a step, rain splattered onto my sneakers. The headlights of cars swished by me. It had rained on that picnic day a long time ago, just like today. On that day, I'd run away from the grass flower arboretum. My body was covered with mud that looked like blood. I hadn't grown up one bit from that little 8-year-old kid. Okay, one more. You're lucky. Hobie, 7 July, year 22. My ankle didn't heal well. I had a small accident a few days ago. Now I can say that it was small, but it was pretty serious at the time. Jimin and that girl ran into each other while practicing a dance move, and they both fell hard. I carried the girl on my back and ran to the hospital. It wasn't far, but it was raining. She was unconscious. While she got treated, I paced up and down the hallway. It was late at night, but the hallway in front of the emergency room was full of people, drinking coffee from the vending machine or looking at their phones. Rain and sweat dripped from my hair. I shook my hair with one hand, sitting down on a bench in one corner, and dropped her bag by mistake. Coins rolled around the floor, and ballpoint pens and a handkerchief were scattered all over. There was also a plane ticket. I knew that she'd applied for an audition for an international dance team. The ticket must have meant that she won the spot. At that moment, the doctor called me up. I put the ticket back in her bag and walked towards the doctor. He said that the girl had hit her head and had a concussion, and that I didn't need to worry too much. It was still raining outside. I stood by the entrance with her. "Hobie," the girl called me. She seemed as if she'd had something to say. "Oh, wait here. I'll go buy an umbrella." I ran out into the pouring rain. A convenience store came into view. I didn't want to hear what she was going to say. I wasn't sure if I could congratulate her. Jimin was anxiously waiting for me back in the practice room. I told him that the girl was okay, but Jimin looked dejected and bent his head low. The next morning, my ankle was swollen. I'd tripped slightly the night before while carrying her on my back. It was raining, and I was running. I didn't even fall. My foot just slipped a little. I put on a pain relief patch and tried to walk more carefully. I thought I'd be okay. It didn't swell up that much at first, but it got worse and worse. I had to stay on my feet all day at the burger joint, and I could not skip dance practice. We are ending tonight at page 167. 167. How's everybody doing? Are you ready for bed? Vero, it's nice to see that you made it finally. That was your hour, Leah. What do I think? Oh boy. I'll tell you what I do think, because I know there are still some people who are new to all of this, including the BU, and I'm not necessarily worried about spoilers for them, but we do have, I think, 3 more episodes of the BU coming on Monday, so I don't want to give away too much, but I will tell you this. I'm beginning to recognize things, really tiny things, that grab my attention from the videos. For example, there are things that stick out to me that I didn't quite understand, and I don't know if I'm necessarily putting pieces together, but little things that I thought may have been just atmospheric now seem to be specific references. For example, a couple things that stuck out to me were the things with wings, and that being a matter of hope. So I think it was Cookie did the painting, and he did the painting. Now I feel like, and don't confirm or deny anything, it really doesn't matter, I guess. I'm going to read it anyway. But it is fun to go through the book and kind of pick up pieces. But I'm starting to wonder now if the face that he was painting was his pair. But beyond that, and I mean smaller things. For example, I think it was Yoongi mentioned the whistling sound. I remember that whistling sound very faintly in the same video where Cookie was painting. I think it was Cookie. So I wondered if that whistling sound was part of it. You know, the things with wings, the hope. I'm starting to see connections with I don't want to say too much. That's that's kind of where I am. But I will tell you though, I am loving every page. I feel like there's kind of a veil over the story where I feel like, and you still have 3 episodes to go for the BU. I feel like there's a veil over the story, and even though I might understand what I think is the general overarching theme, you know me and how much I love the what do you call it? You know, the symbolism, the Easter eggs, the tiny pieces that most people will never see, will never understand. but it has this tiny little piece that connects to something else. I feel like I'm starting to see some of those things in the story, and I'll tell you, don't hold me to this, but I'm kind of curious. We're going to finish this book this weekend, and then we'll cross over into book 2. When we finish book 2, I'm kind of tempted. Well, I know we have to do the webtoon. We got to do the webtoon. But then after that, before watching an entire guide and getting somebody else's theories or perspective, maybe to do a live and go through every video again. And I don't mean break each one down for an hour. I've already done that. But put them in order, watch them again, and then see what is, you know what I mean? Like what all the pieces that come back together to go, oh, that's that, oh, boom, and just have the head explode. I think that would be, yeah. And then, and then I think it would be fun because then I get to take all of my theories from the BU journey, apply what we've read through both books and the webtoon, and then go back through the video series without essentially breaking everything down again and then saying, okay, there's that, okay, this is how they represented that visually. And then I think that would probably, if we need to do a guide after that, we can do that, but I'm pretty excited. I'm having a good time, and I hope you're enjoying too. I know it's literally just me reading to you for an hour each night, but hey, if you're here for it, I'm gonna do it. And honestly, I get a lot more out of reading this out loud to you than I do if I'm sitting here and because I'm gonna tell you what, I don't care what book it is. I could be off the walls, bouncing. Oh, I'm having a great time. All right, let's just every time. So this way I actually get a chance to process the information. So, yeah. Well, thank you for joining me once again. I can tell you, here's what I'm looking at. As of right now, we're looking at a pretty good sized live stream on Saturday. I don't know the time yet, but if I had to guess, it would be 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday. Friday, which is tomorrow, I say we finish this up. Let's start it at the same time, because I feel like this time works for everybody. Actually, with all of you that are here, we have 100 people. I feel like it's got to be the same 100 people that show up each night. Time-wise, how does the current time work for everybody? If I started an hour or two earlier, would that still work for people, or is it... I don't know what that means, but yeah. Okay. All right, we'll see if I can start it a little bit earlier, and then I think I can tell you this right now. It will be longer than an hour because we are averaging about 40 pages a night, and we have about 70 pages left. So I would say tomorrow, get extra comfortable, bring extra snacks and clean socks, because we'll probably be here for about 2 hours, okay? I hope to see you tomorrow, and we'll finish up book 1 of the notes. All right, much love, everybody. Don't forget this. I will see you tomorrow. Joyce, you will boop me. Do it. Do it. Do it. Ash is already at the bar.